Good afternoon. I'm Dan Walsh from Huntington Bank and want to welcome you to the City Club of Cleveland for the kickoff of the 2014 Business Leader Series. It's exciting to see so many people in the room today to welcome Dr. Helper back to Cleveland. We are honored to have you with us today. 2013 was a transformational year for Cleveland. We opened the doors to a new global center for health innovation, along with the new convention center. For the first time in 2 decades, a private downtown office tower was built on the east bank of the Flats. Further down the river, ArcelorMittal announced plans to invest $55 million in one of its 2 blast furnaces. These projects, coupled with the incredible demand for housing in downtown Cleveland, have fueled tremendous investment throughout our region. But I know all of us here aren't here to admire our past efforts. We want to know what's coming. So I think it's safe to say that this sellout crowd today is wondering what's next. How can we keep the momentum going? Where are the potential hurdles? And how can a city like Cleveland, with world-class healthcare and tremendous manufacturing presence, help lead the economic recovery in the U.S.? I'm honored to introduce a familiar face to many of you in this room, one of our nation's top economists, who is kind enough to join us today and share her perspective and answer your questions. Last year, Dr. Susan Helper was appointed Chief Economist for the U.S. Commerce Department. Prior to this role, Dr. Helper had been on leave from Case Western Reserve University while she served as a senior economist for the Council of Economic Advisors, an agency within the White House. She has been recognized internationally for her scholarly work in manufacturing policy. After completing her undergraduate degree at Oberlin College, she earned her PhD in economics from Harvard. Dr. Helper has been a visiting scholar at the University of Oxford, the University of California at Berkeley, Harvard University, and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Susan Helper.
Thanks. I really appreciate the introduction, and I really appreciate the chance to be here today among so many friends and in this august institution that I've long admired, and it's been a dream of mine, I guess, to be up here and to speak to you. So I'm really grateful for that. And I also wanted to acknowledge my staff at the Department of Commerce, a really great group of people I have to work with, including Tommy Wiederhold, who's back here. And if there are questions or follow-ups or things that I don't get to, he can definitely make sure that we follow up in a good way. And so, again, just to specifically thank Dan Molstrup for the invitation, and just to remind or warn my old friends that I'm actually here in a different capacity today. I'm actually representing the administration, so I'm asking your help in helping me stay out of trouble. But it's really an incredible opportunity that I have in Washington to serve the president and to work with Secretary of Commerce Penny Pritzker, and to actually have the opportunity to kind of build on some of the academic research that I've been doing for many years, including with the patience and help of many of the companies and people represented in this room. So I'm also very happy and grateful about that. So what I want to focus today on in my remarks is to talk about manufacturing, which is a key driver of the economy nationally, but also particularly here in Northeast Ohio. And so over the past 4 years, we've created 600,000 new manufacturing jobs and 20,000 in Northeast Ohio. So we're seeing, after years of decline, a final, kind of glimmers of hope, and these investments, that are being made in the region are very great. And we came here in a Chevy Cruze that we rented at the airport. So many very cool things. I spent this morning at Quality Electrodynamics. Very, very cool. So what I'm going to try to take a tour through all the exciting things about manufacturing, and I want to kind of organize my talk around 3, 3, and 3, which is not that I've misremembered the region's area codes, but I want to talk about 3 spillover benefits of manufacturing, 3 ways that policy can help, and 3 programs. I'm going to choose from among the many, but 3 programs that kind of implement this policy framework. So if you get lost, it's 333. Okay, so why is manufacturing important? The key is that this sector creates some really important spillover benefits. And so I think I and the administration, it's not that manufacturing by itself is always this great thing, and manufacturing is the only source of value, and we really don't care about healthcare and other minor things like that. It's that manufacturing has certain benefits that spill over to the rest of the economy, and that we should promote that part of manufacturing that has those spillover benefits, that the market fails in ways that I'll describe to often in these ways produce all of the efficiency, all of the gains we could get. So together, government, private sector, citizens, et cetera, coming together, we can create a better economy. So what are these spillover benefits? Let's see. So before I want to say that, I want to say that manufacturing as a sector really does punch above its weight. So it's 12% of GDP, but it pays jobs with wages 38% higher than in other industries. So that by wages, I mean wages plus benefits. And that's comparing people with similar degrees of education, demographics, union status, et cetera. So that's very good jobs. It has the biggest employment multiplier, and it accounts for 2/3 of R&D. So really a small sector, but really big weight here. And so, as I hinted, these benefits really spill over to the rest of the economy. So that is, even those who didn't make an investment, even those who don't work in manufacturing, benefit from these factors. So these spillover benefits are not captured by any private actor. So without policy support, we could end up with underinvestment in these various areas, and that we would be missing out on some things that could make us economically stronger, both as a country and a nation. I think this is hopefully my sole term of economic jargon. You guys can catch me on that, but it's key, is the spillover concept. So I want to talk now about then each of my 3 spillover benefits, so the first 3 in my talk: wages, employment, and innovation in a little bit more detail. So as I mentioned, the wages plus benefits on an hourly basis are 38% higher. There's actually more than that, because manufacturing jobs are more likely to be full-time year-round jobs, so that not only you get that money per hour, you get more hours and more weeks of work. So one question is, well, why is that so? What is it? And I think there's 2 things. So one is that factories on average tend to be larger businesses, and that makes it more difficult and costly for factory managers to control the work process. And so to some extent, they're inducing workers to take more responsibility to kind of manage themselves by paying a higher wage. And that if you lose that job, then you face a cost of job loss. Secondly, is higher costs of downtime due to the capital-intensive nature of manufacturing. So you don't want to have a whole line, say at Lordstown, stopped because some person messed up on one thing. And auto assembly is a particularly interesting example here, because if you have a top-selling hot model, you shut that line down for 1 minute, it could cost $10,000 in lost profits. So there you want to make sure that people are well-trained and well-motivated. And so then that leaves another kind of spillover that I'll talk about in a little bit, which is training. How do we get these skilled and motivated workers into these jobs? And so this is a challenge, I think, that we face, that I'll talk about a little bit. So that's the first kind of spillover benefit. And why do I say that a wage is a spillover benefit? Well, you think, well, gee, that's nice for that person. They got a good wage. What about me? Well, that person is going to help in several ways. First is that they put money into the economy, more spending, more economic activity. They go to restaurants, buy things for their house, et cetera. Also contribute to a more equal economy. This is tends to be a lot of middle-class jobs in manufacturing, a priority of the president. There's increasing research that suggests that a strong middle class is really good for democracy. It's good for economic mobility. So not only do we have more people kind of at in a kind of medium place in the economy, that people who are born wherever they are in the income distribution have a chance to move up. So those reasons, I think, are why we think that this manufacturing wage spills over and benefits even people who are not in manufacturing, et cetera. And so then a problem is that if you have these spillover benefits, and so we have, people like in this room, like Swagelok, for example, is creating a job, paying a good wage to someone. They're capturing some benefits. That worker is making sure that products come out on time, are high quality, but they're not capturing all the benefits. They're not capturing the fact that that person is going to then go to a restaurant and buy something, or they're going to fix up their house. They're not, and so they may underinvest if they're a solely profit maximizing organization. And so one of the challenges then is, can we think about policies that actually help capture these social benefits and make sure that we don't underinvest from a social point of view in that area. The second kind of spillover benefit is an employment multiplier. And so if you think about doing manufacturing here as opposed to importing a product from abroad, not only are we getting that manufacturing work, but it's tied often to service work. So one example of that, of a kind of high-end service work, if you think about Michigan, home of the auto industry, the fastest growing technical jobs there are software systems and application developers. These are growing at 37% and 24% respectively, the demand for these occupations. And they're growing 3 to 4 times as fast as technical occupations overall because of the demand for programmers to build software applications for automobiles. And I think people following the Detroit Auto Show, you think about all the cool kind of iPod on wheels sorts of things. So to summarize then, so the manufacturing doesn't just stop, the manufacturing jobs then also create and promote service jobs nearby. I also think about, I was at Nortec yesterday and talking about all the kind of services you need to start a business, ranging from legal to accounting to finance, et cetera. More startups, more of that activity occurring in this region or in the country, more of those kinds of good jobs. I'll hit on this a little bit more later, but we often kind of think of, we could have either a manufacturing economy or an innovation economy. And I think the research, as I'll describe, increasingly says, well, actually that's a false choice. That the best kind of manufacturing economy, and the only one that I think, really can realistically hope to have, is an innovative manufacturing economy. We can't have just the innovation without the manufacturing, and we certainly can't have the manufacturing without the innovation. So then that leads me actually to my third spillover, which is in innovation. And so again, thinking about, well, why is innovation a spillover? Again, so you invest in something, a new product, a company invests, and they get some business, that's great. What they don't capture, what their shareholders don't capture is a number of the benefits that come from that. So consumers, we're surprised and delighted by our new toy, or as a patient, we have a great MRI from our medical device sector. We have some kind of new treatment that keeps us healthy. Really great. We're happy about that. Not all of that. We're not paying. We're getting some value on that greater than the price. Also, you think about the suppliers that are supplying parts. You think about all these things that go into a spillover. There's a couple of kinds of spillovers just within innovation that I want to talk about. The first one is investment in basic research. And this has long been thought to be a place where government has a big role. And when you're thinking about doing the kind of work, say that's done by my colleagues at Case Western, examining the properties of some material, you have no idea what industry it's going to end up being useful for. So if you imagine a company specifying research at this kind of low technology readiness level, they may not benefit from it. It may be something that's useful for some other industry. So the risk to a company of sponsoring such research is pretty high, because maybe they'll find something that's totally unuseful. The risk to society is actually quite low, because there's all kinds of cool things that you can find out or you can do with it. A second, and I think newer realization for us in this country, is around technology transition. That this idea of benefits that more than one person or more than one company can learn from a particular investigation of technology, they don't stop at the door of the scientist's lab. That moving from the lab to the market is a really difficult technological transition. And so that's the logic behind the Youngstown that NAMI, the America Makes, the very first example of the National Network of Manufacturing Innovation that the president has set up. So we have a pilot institute for one technology called additive manufacturing in Youngstown. So very exciting. And the purpose of this and the idea behind it is that there's a lot of things that we can learn, so that additive manufacturing, when you're, for example, the way that additive manufacturing works is that you deposit little drops, tiny little drops of material, layer by layer, and you build up the product. And that's very different from the way we've traditionally done manufacturing, which is we subtract. We machine something away, typically. And so something that's made by an additive process is going to have different properties, different responses to stress, different perhaps temperature, sensitivities, et cetera, than something that's made in a traditional way. We could have each company understand that, or we could do it all together and people can kind of share their knowledge and their know-how. And that's the idea behind this National Network of Manufacturing Innovation, about which I will say a little bit more. The third kind of spillover in innovation I want to talk about is this spillover between innovation and production. And I kind of alluded to this in my comment about, we can't really separate innovation and manufacturing. I think, for a long time we've had a view in this country that, manufacturing, it's, dirty, dumb, and dangerous. Let's allow our friends, the Chinese, to do this for us. And we'll just do the, clean idea generation stuff, and that'll be fine. And I think we've seen that, that hasn't worked from a variety of reasons. So one is we've lost a lot of employment, but we've also lost, in many cases, the opportunity to do the innovation on the follow-on technology. And so I think the poster child for this is electronics, computers, so thinking about laptop computers. Initially, it was just a few components made overseas, then the assembly. Eventually, the design, now the R&D, and really the only company that really does anything with laptop production or design in the US anymore is Apple, and it was a very small share of the market. So the argument is, and I think there's an increasing body of research that suggests this is true, that if you want to keep innovating, you've got to keep producing. And the probably many people in this room that know this and have been involved in this, but if you think about, where do ideas come from? How do you know what you can do with a technology unless you've kind of seen how it works, how it, the details. Just to give one example of this, in the auto industry, one of the things that's happening with CAFE requirements for greater fuel economy that end up saving customers money and also clean the environment, it's made automakers think a lot more about weight. And we have the really innovative Ford F-150 truck with that's made out of aluminum, weighs 700 pounds less than a typical truck. Every 10% decline in weight leads to about a 7% improvement in gas mileage. How do you get there? Well, you've got to be using all kinds of odd materials. So aluminum is one, and that requires a bunch of technical changes. You can't use magnets, for example, to move it along the production process in a way that you can with steel. Another, actually, so the steel makers have also stepped up to really improve steel a lot. There are things called high-strength steel. There's a a temptation. If you're a busy auto designer, wow, okay, so this steel is strong. I'm just going to specify my same part, and I'll just make it thinner because the steel is stronger. Well, it doesn't work that way in many cases. That the strength is of the part comes from when it's stretched. So you end up needing to put ridges in this steel so that it's stretched. The ridges have no function in terms of the car except to keep the steel strong. There's a lot of know-how about how to make this work that's stuck or exists in 100-person tool shops around Ohio, around Michigan. How do we get that information to the auto designer, either at General Motors or Ford, or at a supplier that's making a metal part? It's a real, I think, opportunity and a challenge for us. A second kind of issue is springback, where you put something in a part, in a die, and it's going to return a little bit to its original shape. Using traditional steel, we understand a lot about how that's going to happen. With these newer materials, we don't know. And so there's a lot of opportunity then for, and need for conversation between the designer, the supplier, the tool maker, the worker on the shop floor. So I can quote from a speech that Secretary Pritzker gave a couple days ago at the Detroit Auto Show about, when you see the new technologies and the features on these cars, you wonder, how many times did a worker on the factory floor have to go back to the designer to make this new technology fit and function correctly? Is it 5 times? How much? And not just, it's the factory floor, but it's also going out to the small supplier, et cetera. So one of the things that I think that is a challenge and an opportunity for us is to take advantage of the fact that we have these connections. We have this ecosystem of small companies in Northeast Ohio. Do we connect them to the innovation economy? If we think about the 3D printers, they have parts, they have valves, they have many things that are very similar to traditional machines that they've been building for years. How do we connect them to that discussion? How do we give them the skills that they need to participate well? And so as I've just alluded to, well, let me kind of summarize again my 3. So we've done the first 3 now. First of our triplets, which is the spillover benefits. I'm saying their wages, the manufacturing pays higher wages, it has a greater employment multiplier, and it has more innovation. These spillovers are magnified by structural changes in the U.S. economy. So we used to have, big vertically integrated behemoths. So the canonical example being Ford, that used to start with iron ore from its mines that are owned in Minnesota, ship them in the Ford ships across the Great Lakes. Ships landed at the Ford docks on the River Rouge, entered the Ford River Rouge factory. 3 days later, actually, they were mated with tires made from rubber from Brazilian plantations owned by Ford. 3 days later, left as a finished Model T. So in that way of doing things, there are many fewer spillovers. Any kind of innovation that Ford does is going to be captured if they want a supplier to do something differently. So for example, the newfangled idea of mass production, that you needed a lot more investment in tooling, well, that wasn't a problem because Ford just told its division to go do that. So certain of these spillovers were less difficult because there was less of this problem that one person makes an investment, another person benefits. There was a problem of lack of ideas. Ford had to shut down for over a year in the 1920s to make the Model A, when finally the competition caught up to the Model T. So it's not like I'm saying, let's yearn for the days of the large vertically integrated corporation. Just saying that we have different problems now, and that sometimes our institutions haven't caught up. And one of our goals in administration is to help these institutions catch up. So just to kind of give an example of this from the industry I've done a huge amount of research on is in the automotive supply chain. So in the US in 1988, there used to be fewer than 2 employees in a firm's making automotive parts for every employee at an automaker like Ford or GM. By 2010, there were 4 employees in parts makers for every automaker employee. So we kind of cut the vertical integration in half. And we saw this with the auto rescue, that the main people who kind of were saved from losing their jobs were not auto assembly workers, but parts makers. I think the nation learned about this. And so it's not just autos. Around the world, around the industry, U.S. manufacturers depend on suppliers for over half of their value added. But the problem, and so this creates a lot of benefits in terms of opportunities for cross-fertilization, but the problem is who's going to pay for the investments that you need to keep the supply chain up to snuff? It's really tempting if you're a customer company to say, I'll just let my rival fund that technological development or pay a price to that supplier that has a margin that includes some money for research. I just want to pay that supplier, 0.0001 cents over their costs, marginal cost of making that product for me. That is a problem. And I think we're seeing that in the auto supply chain. I did a study of the auto supply chain back at Case, and one of the things I found is that a lot of these companies are very small. So a third of auto supply chain employment is in firms with fewer than 500 employees, and there's few supports for them to upgrade. So fewer than half of suppliers, by their own admission, have quality circles, have consistent preventive maintenance, and 30% of them have no engineers. So this is a problem. We have a kind of our basis of a lot of our prosperity is really not in the innovation conversation. So just to kind of summarize, we have these 3 spillover benefits. These benefits are then magnified by the change and the deverticalization and the kind of fragmentation of production in the U.S. So what can we do about that? I think there's 3 kinds of policies. This is my second 3. The first one is encourage industry clusters. The second is to promote high road production within industries. And the third is to compete on value, not price. And I will talk about these pretty briefly. One of the things that we've seen in Northeast Ohio and in general is that economic activity is not kind of randomly or uniformly distributed across the country. There's clusters, groupings, and there's reasons for that. That when you have a lot of firms in the same industry or similar industries, they can share workers. And as at Nortec, people were pointing out, it's a lot less risky to move here to work on, say, medical devices, because maybe one doesn't work out, but there's going to be a bunch of others that are going to use your skills. You can share suppliers. You can serve services. So die repair is something you can get around here that maybe you can't get in many parts of the country. You can share ideas and talk about things. That's one of the ideas, I think, behind the Youngstown Institute NAMI. And I'll talk a little bit, I guess, about how government can promote that. I mean, this is obviously, there's a lot of benefits from being in the cluster, and you can get a virtuous cycle started where one company comes, and that makes it more attractive for lots of other companies to come as well, or to grow and expand. But it can also be a vicious cycle, and we've seen that once one company moves, it may make economic sense, but then that means that the cost-benefit calculation for moving for the second company begins to look more attractive as well. So it's a little bit fragile, and I'm one of the things I guess that you should know in DC is that the work that's being done here in Northeast Ohio around clusters and development of clusters by Nortec, Magnet, other groups is really seen as a national model to kind of rebuild and get the virtuous cycle started again. And so the research shows that these stronger industry clusters leads to greater growth in employment, wages, patenting, and new regional industries. So you might think that, oh wow, if we really focus on one industry, so we could become Detroit with autos and then we're stuck. In fact, well-run clusters, and if you have a variety of clusters, you are more likely to see spin-off industries than areas that are not set up that way. I want to talk, how much time should I spend? 5 more minutes? Good, okay. So I want to talk a little bit about this high road production idea. One of the things that sometimes these discussions of clusters or advanced manufacturing, we focus a lot on an industry. We have advanced industries, and then by implication, we have backward industries. And I want to suggest that that's not always the best way to look at things. Using an example of automotive stamping. It's a very narrow industry. I mean, not so much those of us in Northeast Ohio, but it's generally a narrow industry. You take in some sheets or rolls of steel, you bang on it with a big press, and out comes a cup holder or some kind of other part that might go for into a car. There's huge variation in the productivity of these firms and the innovativeness of these firms. I've picked one example, but this economists find this across industries. So this survey I did, just asking people about their productivity, asking firms, the lowest 10 percentile, they had about $30,000 in value added per worker. You think about that, that's not very much. You can barely pay a decent wage to that worker. And even if you did, you have no money left over for profit, no money left over for reinvestment. Not a good model, but we've still got 10, 15, 20% of the firms in that area. They're kind of living off their past capital. If you look at the high end, the top 10%, you see 130,000 value added per worker. In better times like today, $250,000 value added per worker. There, you've got a big pie. You can do a lot of cool things. And some of that spills over to the workers. In these low productivity firms, they're paying about $9 per hour, not very many benefits. The high productivity firms are paying $17 with pretty good benefits. And this is somebody called a production worker. The production worker at the second firm is going to be doing really different things. They're not just kind of manually unloading and loading parts. Often in these firms, the unloading and loading is done by robots. The production worker in the high productivity firm is going to be doing a lot of problem solving. They're not, in fact, they may be called an operator, but they don't operate. They watch, they set up. And so then statistically in this study that I did, what separated these two types of firms? So they consistently performed preventive maintenance. So they always knew which machines were up. They could run at much higher levels of capacity utilization, much more likely to have employees participate in quality circles to provide suggestions about how to improve, had a higher percentage of sales from products designed by their firm, and also, and this is key, had a trusting relationship with their major customer. The major customer was not trying to squeeze, but was trying to have a productive value chain. So I guess what I want to do then is to say that in these top 10% firms, I would call that advanced manufacturing. You're using robots, you're often exotic materials, brand new materials. And this fits actually with the definition of advanced manufacturing that the President's Advisory Council has also used. So we shouldn't think about doing stamping as necessarily meaning that we're a backwater. Let's see, so that's my three policy areas were, we wanted to promote clusters, and let's see, we're going to do high road.
If you like, you can work the last three into Q&A.
All right. And I told you that I was going to be fast. Well, let's do that then.
Okay, great. Let me do the pivot then. Stay right here. I'm going to do some quick stuff here. Thank you so much, Sue. I'm Dan Malthrop, CEO of the City Club of Cleveland. Today we have a program kicking off our 2014 Business Leaders Series, this one featuring Sue Helper, Chief Economist for the U.S. Department of Commerce. In a moment, we will return to Dr. Helper for our traditional City Club question and answer period, into which she will fit the final three. We encourage you to formulate questions about that final three and other things for our speaker now, and remind you to be brief and to the point. We welcome all of you here and those joining us via webcast and broadcast. Our primary media partner is IdeaStream. That's 90.3 WCPN FM, 104.9 WCLV and WVIZ PBS. We're also carried on WTAM and many other radio stations across the country. Television broadcasts of the City Club of Cleveland are made possible by Cleveland State University and PNC. Our live webcast is supported by the University of Akron. We would also like to thank the sponsors of our 2014 Business Leaders Series. There are many of them, and they are led by Huntington Bank. Thank you very much. Also joining Huntington are the Fredonia Group, Humana, Meaden & Moore, Falls Communications, the Downtown Cleveland Alliance, Level 7, and Inside Business. We also welcome guests at tables hosted by corporate partners listed in your programs. Thank you very much for your support. Today is the Sally Grease Forum in honor of women of achievement in business and management, made possible by a generous gift from Bob and Sally Grease. Would you both please stand to be recognized? Thank you very much. We also welcome today students to today's programs. Student participation is made possible by a generous gift from the Charles E. Spar Charitable Trust. Today we welcome students from High Tech Academy and Notre Dame Cathedral Latin High School. Students, would you please stand to be recognized? Perhaps just Notre Dame Cathedral Latin. The City Club has announced dates for two of the largest civic events in our community, the State of the County and the State of the City. Please do consider joining us for those. You can find out more information about our upcoming forums. You can find our archives and information about membership, all online at cityclub.org. And now we would like to return to our speaker for our traditional City Club question and answer period. We welcome questions from everyone, including guests and non-members. Holding microphones today are our program director, Carrie Miller, back, and Administrative Assistant Kirsten Pianka. First question, please.
Hello, Doctor, and welcome back to Cleveland, of course. And it's kind of a joy to be able to address a former CWU professor, as I am as well. Allowing for the fact that you want to get your 3 extra points in, I'd like a question answered about the economic implications to the collateral industries and the manufacturing industry in Ohio and the Midwest over the balance between the environmental concerns of the Trans-Canada Keystone Pipeline and the fracking industry here in Ohio, which has been touted by many as being so vital to our economic recovery here in the state.
Woo! Can I talk for 25 minutes about my next, So I'll take the invitation, and I will try to address your question. I guess I'm enough of a professor. I was assured, Dan, that I would be shorter than my allotted time, and I did not. So we did my 2 of my second 3, which were clusters, high road production, and the last is value, not price. And I'll describe that in terms of one of the proposals or programs that we have in government. So then the second 3 of the many programs that we have to promote manufacturing, I have selected 3. So the first is NNMI, the National Network of Manufacturing Innovation, of which the Youngstown Institute in 3D Printing is the first. And so I've talked about that. The second is a program called the Investing in Manufacturing Communities Partnership, which is, the idea here is to promote clusters. There are grants for planning to help communities integrate their plans to include, so basically to focus on a key technology or supply chain and then think through the workforce aspects, the supply chain aspects, the infrastructure aspects, et cetera, of that. What would be good? Are there some investments that could be shared by that cluster that could be promoted or subsidized in part by government, but also with a large matching grant or matching funds from local institutions? So one thing I should mention then about both these programs is that we try to make your tax dollars go very far. And so there's a lot of these new programs coming with matching money. And I think that's appropriate because a lot of these investments that we're talking about do have some private benefits. You invest in a new technology as a company, you have a product, you get something. And so then you think of the private aspect as subsidizing that, and then a public aspect that subsidizes the public benefit. So the NAMI, the Youngstown Institute, has $30 million in federal money and $40 million in partner contributions. The last one, being very quickly, is the value, not price. And this is an initiative of actually my office called the Analyze Costs Everywhere initiative. And there's a website, which Tom... acetool.commerce.gov. What this does is it helps you measure the hidden costs of having a far-flung supply chain. So often if you look at published statistics, you can see what the wages of some other country or state are, but you don't really see what the productivity of that person is. You can see the taxes are really high in some place, but you don't know kind of what do you get for that tax money. You also don't know some of the hidden costs of what does it cost? You have a problem in your factory in China, you got to fly an engineer over there. That can be $10,000 just for the airfare, let alone the jet lag and the reduced productivity when they come back, and et cetera. And then there's logistics costs, that there's a lot of risk if you have your goods on a container in a ship in the ocean and that container gets lost. I'm talking about not like a little container, but a huge rail car sized container. Maybe that's your whole shipment for a customer, you lose a customer. So we have some tools that try to help figure out what all those costs are, what the net benefits, what's the value of producing in the US, not just the cost. We're working to improve that tool, and we're looking for beta testers. So if you're interested in learning more, you could go to this website, and you can also see me or Tommy as well. Okay, so thanks for that. Now to this question. So I think I want to talk first, I guess, in general about the environment. You sort of often think about the environment versus manufacturing. And I think that's a misconception that there's a Brookings study that suggests that the clean energy economy is actually more manufacturing intensive than the rest of the economy. So if you think about a wind turbine, for example, there's 2,000 tons of steel in a wind turbine. There are, just to take a tiny piece made in Cleveland, $40,000 worth of fasteners in that wind turbine. And this goes for energy efficient heaters, air conditioners, et cetera. So if we add that all up, you get that in fact, a cleaner environment in general benefits manufacturing. And I guess then the next piece is sort of think about this energy revolution, that we really have a very different situation with respect to energy than we've had in the past, where we were importing a lot of oil. And so we've seen, for a variety of reasons, our oil imports are down. And this has made a substantial contribution to reducing our trade deficit. And this oil, why is that so? It's a combination of we're producing oil here, substituting some U.S.-produced natural gas in some cases for oil. We also have these renewable sources are taking an increasingly great percentage of our energy needs. And then finally is work done on energy efficiency, that it's not something we've paid a lot of attention to as a country. Energy's been cheap. And I think now understanding some of the follow-on costs of these problems, there's been greater emphasis on understanding, sort of just as I think Toyota suggests, wow, there's a lot of costs buried in having a lot of inventory. We're now seeing, wow, there's a lot of costs buried in having cheap energy and not conserving it. And so if you think about cars, and we're all consumers, one of the things that happens when you have more efficient engines or a lighter car, you can have a smaller engine. So the benefit of a lightweight material is not just that you have less of a car to push around, you also can have a smaller engine. So the Ford F-150, I think, is a V6 rather than a V8 because they don't need that much power. You can still get all the towing power and whatever for all of our suburban off-road needs. So then finally, I think to kind of come back to the Keystone issue, I'm going to, I guess my first question, my first evasion. This is not a decision that the Commerce Department is going to make. I think that these trade-offs are, the administration is well aware of them. So maybe I can actually answer the next question.
Dr. Helper, a couple of questions. One is, here I am. Can you give an estimate as to what percentage of our manufacturing has been farmed out overseas since, let's say, 1960? That's number one. Number two, with the notwithstanding what you just said about price versus value, the fact remains that workers overseas have a much, much lower rate than in the United States. And the effect of this is ultimately for the retailers and whoever the users in this country to determine. But you touched on some of the high-end products like capital-intensive, like computers, cars. But what about textiles, shoes, toys, household goods, which I think the great majority now come from China? How do you deal with that challenge?
Great. Employment since 1960. One of the remarkable things about manufacturing employment from about 1960 to about 2000, it was really stable. It varied with the business cycle, but between about 15 and 17 million employees. Now, the economy grew over that time and manufacturing got more productive, but we had a pretty stable amount of employees. Then the bottom fell out in about 2000, and we lost a third of our manufacturing employment, several million jobs. Then what's happened since that bottom in 2010, is we've gained, for the first time, about 600,000 manufacturing jobs. And so, and this is remarkable. I mean, we sort of think 600,000, but it's actually both a big number and an important number, because during the last recovery of 2003, even though the overall economy gained employment, manufacturing continued to shrink. So we've really changed structurally some of what's has been happening in the economy. So I guess what I want to make the point to answer your question is that this idea that there's inevitable decline in manufacturing, I think, is not supported by a look at the numbers, and it seems like we actually are turning things around. It's very hard in the numbers to figure out how much of that is reshoring, how much of that is exports, et cetera. It looks like we got a big bump in 2010 coming from inventory restocking, and then a little bit more, about a quarter of the increase in employment came from exports. More recently, that growth has slowed, partly because we don't have this inventory restocking phenomenon anymore, but also because of partners abroad have not been growing very fast, in Europe especially. That's beginning to change. On the wage question, I think it's important to note that the U.S. competes not just with low-wage countries like China and Mexico. We also compete, and not always successfully, with high-wage countries like Germany. So Germany's wages are significantly higher than ours, yet manufacturing as a percentage of GDP is almost double in Germany compared to us. And one of the things that they've done is they've figured out, I think, how to grow the kind of institutions that allow these connections across these disparate firms to be made. So they have very good policies around clusters. They have these applied technology institutes. They're called Fraunhofer. That is one of the inspirations for the National Network of Manufacturing Innovation. They have training, lifelong training, a lot of apprenticeships. About 60% of German high school students do an apprenticeship, which gives them some practical knowledge as well as a conceptual foundation and also some income. They then go on to college, so it's not an either or. So I think we have a lot to learn, and we don't have to compete, by lowering our wages or by imitating China. So then the last question about the industries is, so if you think about textile, shoes, toys, there are actually, I don't know if people know this, but there's actually a suit manufacturer right here on East 55th in Cleveland, the Hugo Boss plant, that my husband bought I think the very first suit of his life there, and not long ago, four years ago, to go to a wedding. Not our wedding, but a wedding. And they're actually competing and doing well because what they've done is it's a kind of the kind of value not price ideas. They've really thought about logistics costs and the fact that they can now supply, because they're in Cleveland as opposed to Turkey, they can make multiple shipments very quickly to wherever the demand is. They restock very quickly. Turns out those costs are actually quite high and can overcome the slightly higher wage costs. That's another point, is that these low-wage countries, they're not so low-wage anymore that their wages are rising. So I think there's a variety of ways in that we can compete, even in some of these we think of as older industries.
Thank you, Dr. Helper. And this is a follow-up on the previous guest's question. The NAFTA agreement back in the 90s, we saw quite a bit of exodus of manufacturing from Ohio and this part of the state. We now have the TPP agreement, and so many people don't know what that is, so you might explain. But why is this administration keeping it under such wraps? There's very little discussion publicly about this agreement coming up.
Yeah, okay, well, I can describe what it is, and I am among those that is not in the loop, so I'll be limited in what I can say. But what it is an attempt to have a large trading bloc that would include countries like Japan, Malaysia, Vietnam, that would renegotiate some tariffs, agree on some investment standards, agree on some environmental and labor standards. The administration's view is that this is a way to promote growth and to promote exports, and that our markets have tended to be more open than these foreign markets, and so that this treaty would allow that to happen. I think, yeah. And I think I should also say the administration is cognizant that there's not only in these agreements opportunities, but there's also difficult transitions. And one of the issues is, how do we smooth those transitions? We haven't done such a good job in the past. And what can we do to improve those transitions?
All right, we'll stand up. Dr. Halbert, thank you for being here. Those of us from Magnet, I know, are thrilled to know that innovation is a key component, because that's one of our sweet spots at Magnet. My question is, on the innovation, NASA and the defense departments are where you see an awful lot of creative ideas with materials, new concepts. I mean, we're all used to using some of the things that came out of NASA in our everyday lives. What is your concern about the reduction of commitments to both NASA and to defense innovation?
No, I think this is obviously you have to make choices in a budget, and the administration overall has a incredible commitment to innovation generally. So a number of the budgets around basic research have been protected. Congress has not passed the $1 billion that the administration has asked for this would be $1 billion over a decade to set up these institutes of manufacturing innovation. So instead, the way they've been funded, at least the government portion, has been that DOD and the Department of Energy have come up with the money out of existing budgets to fund not only the additive one in Youngstown, but one that was just announced a couple of days ago in North Carolina around wide band gap semiconductors. There'll be another. So there's, I think, an overall issue in the size of budgets and what can we get through Congress. And so there's been some difficult conversations about priorities. One of the things I think that the administration is committed to doing, and where Magnet plays a key role, is making those investment and innovation dollars more more productive. I mean, and one of the things that you guys have done, I was there a couple years ago, was set up a fair where people from NASA could describe their technology, and you worked, I know, a great deal with these scientists at how do you actually talk to ordinary people and owners of small businesses. I'd be interested afterwards, actually, to get a little update on that. So I think that there's real efforts around making sure then that activity continues, but that it also spills over more into the civilian economy.
Thank you very much, Dr. Helper, for joining us today. You've been listening to Dr. Susan Helper, the Chief Economist for the U.S. Department of Commerce, as part of the 2014 Business Leaders Series put on by the City Club and Inside Business. And with that, today our forum is adjourned.